Okay, you ready to do it?
I think so. Thank you so much.
All right, all right. So here we go. So five, four, three, two, and one. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am thrilled to have as my guest today, Virginia Cruse. Virginia, welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, Virginia is a soldier turned therapist. She's a former active duty armor soldier, a master's level licensed professional counselor, and national certified counselor specializing in military issues and combat related trauma. She's not the typical quote, you can do it therapist. Rather, she's been in the trenches and she speaks from a place most other therapists have never been. Her passion comes through loud and clear, and she knows that PTSD is a killer and that dissolving the stigma around mental health and treatment saves lives. Virginia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a thrill to be here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. So, listen, before we get going, share with our
Mhm.
listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Sure. I think I would probably best classify myself as a Massachusetts girl. Grew up on the South Shore of Massachusetts, and now I live on the South Texas border. So I live on the South Texas Mexico border in a
Oh,
little
wow.
town called McAllen.
Wow. Okay, cool. So, very interesting. Your bio is very interesting. We're going to get into that. I didn't even know so the certifications specializing in military issues and combat related trauma. Very cool. We're
Mhm.
going into that. All right, let's go. So, how the heck, first of all, did you get into the military? Share with us that story.
Well, I think like a lot of folks, I didn't enlist in the military because I was trying to decide between my gap year, do I do it in Bruges or in Paris? I joined the military because I didn't really have a lot of other opportunities. And I really enjoyed it. I had for the most part a really a good, it was good till it wasn't,
Hmm.
as most things are. And so when I was in the military, I'm an Arabic speaker, and the Army sent me to school to learn Arabic. And then I became an Army interrogator.
Wow.
Yeah, a very, very interesting kind of a one off background. And, and then later on, had a lot of problems that came to that. As you can imagine, I was pretty busy in the beginning of the war cycle, just by virtue of the skill set.
Hmm.
And so after my third deployment, I wasn't doing well.
Hmm.
I was drinking a lot. I was
Hmm.
chronically suicidal.
Okay,
I
wait, wait, hold
was,
on. I want to
yeah,
I want to interrupt you and slow things down a little bit
of course.
because this sounds really interesting to me. First of all, looking at you, you're the last person I would pick out of a line and say
Mhm.
she's an interrogator. And maybe that's why they did that. I don't know. But what was that? I mean, how did you take this on? First of all, being in the military and
Mhm.
being an interrogator, how did that sit with you? How did you deal with that?
I think as a younger person, and I enlisted in 97. So, that's longer ago. A lot of your listeners are, not that old. But back in 1997, it was really exciting for me. This was an opportunity for me to go to college, further my education, really enrich myself in an academic environment in which I didn't have to work by going to
Mm-hmm.
school for my language. So I got to go to the Presidio of Monterey in California for 2 years and sit at the feet of these incredible professors and learn Arabic.
Wow.
The interrogation school, very difficult. I ended up scoring really high on my entrance exams. There was a bonus that came along with it. It was very fell into it. Um, and then later, I sat at the feet. My professors and the folks who, the teachers who taught me, these were, Vietnam era interrogators. They were
Wow.
just incredible, and the interrogator course was very difficult. There was a real stress on ethics, on what we
Mm.
could and couldn't do. That was before the current war cycle kicked off, and
Mm-hmm.
so when it did, um, I ended up deploying, like many folks did, with the Army Reserve, and ended up being one of the only folks in country who could speak Arabic.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, I had
Just
picked up.
that alone, that whole thing just sounds so intense.
Yeah, it's been something. I'm glad you said that. It's, you know, that my past and coming to terms with that is something that I really struggled with personally,
Mhm.
because I do get to hide in plain sight. No one's going to be like, you know what? I bet she speaks Arabic. That's not a thing.
No, no.
Um, I hope I don't come off as an interrogator to some folks, although I think you'd be surprised how analogous the skill sets are between being an interrogator and being a mental health therapist.
Right,
Just
right.
kind of that professional question asking. Um, but as we all know, kind of after the fact, things got really hairy and really unethical really fast. I mean, we've all read the Hoffman report. We've all, kind of seen, we've seen the pictures from places like Abu Ghraib. We've heard about Guantanamo. And to have been kind of in the cut when that was going on, and the aftermath of that, and the incredible really shame and guilt that I carried of
Mm,
being a part of that. And
mhm,
it very difficult, and a huge part of my own work that I'm very thankful I've had the opportunity to do, and especially through group therapy. I'm part of a fairly intensive therapy group
mm,
for therapists. It's an online process group, or rather, training group, I should say, that's run by Chaim Weinberg out of the Sacramento Center for Psychotherapy, and he
mm.
is wonderful.
What's his name?
Chaim Weinberg, so
Hi. Okay.
HaimWeinb, as in Bravo, I think ERG, but I could be getting that wrong. I get a
Okay.
lot of things wrong. Um, just brilliant. And so I've been part of his process group,
Mm,
and it's for therapists. And he is a master clinician and a master
mm.
group therapist, and so I've been part of that for about the last 5 years.
Wow.
And really working, for me personally, it's been the most integral part of my own trauma processing. I had done a lot of work individually, a lot of
Mhm,
work one on one.
mhm,
But for me personally, it was that interpersonal piece, that, I needed to ask and have answered the question, can I be my truest self? Can I be authentic in terms of who I am now and my past, and how that informs who I am now? And can I be fully known and still be loved and honored and respected and valued by people who I love and honor and respect and value? Is that possible? And that was the piece in my own process that I was really missing, in terms of processing my own trauma experience
mm.
from military and deployments and so for me, group therapy was that key.
Okay. This is to me fascinating. I want to go back, if I may,
Of course.
Virginia, and ask you, when you were in the midst of this, uh, how, you talked about Abu Ghraib and everything. How did this sit with you? I mean, were you aware of what was going on with you? Was anything going on with you at that time? Or were you like, man, this, I can't do this, or this is not sitting well with me?
That's a great question. Um, I would say for my first two deployments, um, no, it was kind of flying by. There's this expression, building the airplane as you're flying it.
Right.
And that's what we were doing for the most part. And I had a third deployment that it did me in. It was not okay.
Mhm.
It was not okay. I think the word that I would use is phantasmagoric. It was not okay. I was already, at that point, I was already very, very sick, I think,
Mhm.
with my own symptomology, with my own PTSD. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It was, kind of a back to back to back deployment.
Mhm.
And for me, that was the one that I was like, oof, you know what? This is not okay.
And were you sitting alone with those symptoms?
Very much so. Sitting alone with those symptoms, but also very much needing to perform and putting a lot of pressure. The avoidance is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really helps us till it doesn't, or at least it helped me. And so I had to sit with a lot of those. This was back in 2008 when we, at least on the military side of the house and in DoD, Department of Defense, I wasn't talking about PTSD. I didn't know what was wrong with me,
Mhm.
but I knew there was something wrong with me. I knew there
How
was something very
how?
deeply wrong with me. I was very, just chronically suicidal. Um, one, look, if, and but with a very very service minded in retrospect. If I die, it would be the best thing for my unit, it would be the best thing for my family. They wouldn't have to have a crazy person among them. I was drinking a lot, a lot, a lot.
Mhm.
I was blowing up my really great marriage, you know torpedoing my beautiful friendships,
Mhm.
not doing well at work. I was very, very sick. And I finally got to a point where I had an incident at work in which I kind of snapped out at someone. And, a lot of it, it's for me, it's kind of that whole period of time is sort of a brownout. There are just bits and pieces that I remember. It's almost like it's, it's, it's very strange to look back on. It's like it's happened to someone else. And at that time, I was kind of voluntold, as we say, to go to mental health and go talk to
Voluntold.
someone. Yeah, and I was invited to go talk to mental health, voluntold. And I remember at the time, I lived in Europe at the time, and I was really thankful because I knew there was something wrong with me. I didn't know what it was.
Were you
I
talking to anyone, any colleagues at the time about this?
Oh gosh, no.
And that's because of the culture, military culture, or why?
I think that was because of my own fear. So I was experiencing a lot of paranoia, hallucinations, smelling things that are burning when I'm, sitting in my living room, hearing gunshots when there aren't any. I had this very intense fear that somehow I was going to be found out and be found out as crazy
Mhm.
and lose my job, my security clearance, my life. It was my own fear, I think, that went into that. And so I was very much sitting with that on my own. And so when I had the chance to go to mental health, I was excited. And very, I got to sit down with a military mental health professional, a psychiatrist, a Fulberg colonel. So this is a very, a high-ranking field grade officer, just to add to that power
Mhm.
differential.
Mhm.
And what we in the Army would call a slick sleeve, meaning that they don't have a combat patch on one of their arms. So they hadn't deployed to an environment.
Mhm.
And I, I was so sick and I poured my heart out. I mean, it was, from what I remember, again, that brownout period, very ugly. Um, and I let everything out. And it was the first time I had ever talked with anybody about what I was experiencing. And I was so thankful because my expectation was that I was going to, very, very militant, that we're going to come up with courses of action, pick one, and then just go on in the matrix. And at the end of the 50 minutes, of my hour, the colonel looked at me and he said, Virginia, I can tell that you are really hurting right now and I want to help, but I can't if you don't choose to be honest with me. I was really perplexed by that and I asked for some clarification. And he said, we all know women don't serve in combat. And it was the kick while I was down. Um, because this was after my third deployment. He diagnosed me with a personality disorder. I was sent back to my unit with the, yeah, I'd really like to help Virginia, but I can't because. And it was, I was already pretty bad before that experience, in terms of my own symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, it it's hard to describe the betrayal that I felt at that time. The suicidality I felt at that time. It was not just being betrayed by a mental health professional. Um, it was the fact that it was done by someone in uniform. And the fish rots from the head.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, when I went back to work, everyone had known, there are no secrets in a military unit. And folks, it was, yeah, it was tough.
Mm.
I felt really dismissed, belittled, condescended. And I was already, I think it's worth, I think I've said it already too many times maybe, but I was very, very sick. And we don't know that our judgment's impaired when our judgment's impaired.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not okay. And I remember thinking to myself afterwards, among empty wine bottles and a lot of tears. And I thought to myself, if I don't figure this out, if I don't understand what is going on with me, I'm gonna die.
Mm.
Like this is no shit going to kill me. Either either my brain is gonna kill me from the inside out, or more likely I will kill myself. But this is a life or death situation here. And I need to do something. I need to figure this out.
And this was in the wake of that episode with that colonel.
Yeah, right after.
Wow.
And so I did what I knew how to do, and that was go to school. And so I went to graduate school and I started studying professional counseling.
And were you out of the military at this point?
Still a
Oh,
reservist.
okay,
So
still
kind of
reservist.
kind of this lingering part-timer. It's like
Okay.
having a like having a like a an ex-spouse who's just kind of always in the background nagging you, um, for child support or something. But it's yeah, I started studying, using my GI Bill to go to school. And one of the first gigs that I got after I was licensed was I started teaching at an inpatient psychiatric facility for active duty service members, so across the board, who were struggling with kind of co-occurring PTSD and mostly substance use or alcohol use, really, for
Mm-hmm.
the most part. And my job was to teach PTSD, kind of to do the psych ed piece. And I used to have a non-commissioned officer from my first deployment who used to always say, Cruse, are you picking up what I'm putting down? And I just that I love that expression. And as I was teaching, these, again, very vulnerable, very sick folks who I could just relate to so much. I saw the eyes glaze over. And as we're talking about the amygdala and the brain, and they're just like, oh, like seriously, girl, really? And I said, you know what? It's time to scrap this. And so I created my own curriculum. And I thought, and it was very based on my own healing journey. I said to myself, what is it that I wish I had known 10 years ago? What is it that I wish I had known? And what I really needed to know was, what is trauma? the things that you go over on this podcast all the time. What are my courses of action? What's my treatment options? How do I choose one? How do I get my family on board? How do I talk to my workplace about this? How do I talk to my chain of command?
Mm-hmm.
And how do I keep from relapsing? So my thoughts were very pragmatic. And when I was looking for teaching materials, I was looking for something that was a clinician to English translation. How can you know and your brother's a Navy SEAL, so I know you know this. It's our service members are unbelievably intelligent. We teach 18-year-olds how to fix helicopters and fighter jets, and we can absolutely teach them what PTSD is and what it
Mm-hmm.
isn't, and how to recover from that. That's a lot easier than learning how to, drive a tank or fly a drone or speak Arabic even.
Mm-hmm.
And so my passion really came in, how can I take all this clinical jargon and break that down in a way so that it's not me as the high and mighty, super important clinician, but how can make it more of a love letter?
Mm-hmm.
How can I lead with love? My love, how can I say, what, without delving into too much self-disclosure, because it wouldn't be appropriate in a teaching environment, but to say, from one soldier to another, from me to you, this is in your language, in our shared vernacular. This is what's going on. This is what you're very likely experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And to start this very aggressively authentic conversation, and it needed to be aggressive because of my time constraint. I only had 28 days,
Mm-hmm.
as we do inpatient, before their insurance ran out and I never get to see them again. But to take a bunch of information, compact it, and very force feed that, with a lot of love and a lot of compassion, and talk about the things that we don't very often talk about when it comes to military trauma,
Mm-hmm.
talking about war crimes, talking about institutional betrayal, about leadership betrayal,
So
talking
all
them.
of that stuff was you, correct? You shifted the curriculum around
I
a bit.
did. And from that, I created the Soldier's Guide to PTSD.
Oh my God.
And so that's my book. And I think we're giving your listeners a free audio copy of that book. And don't worry, for your listeners, I'm not the person who reads it. It's Kelly Taker. She's brilliant. Um, but yeah, this book came out of it, and our workbook and our PTSD recovery series came from that. It wasn't just about like saying, wow, here's a problem, but how can I take what I have learned
Mm-hmm.
and really pay it forward? Because there's one of me, but I've been able to, talk about the book with folks like you, get the book out, and talk about suicide, talk about, what do we do when there's a suicide in the unit? How do we talk to our loved ones about PTSD treatment? How do we talk about things that we wish we had done in
Mm-hmm.
war, things that we should have known? How do we talk about moral injury? How do we talk about, how do we balance the death of a loved one, someone closer than a brother, losing someone on the battlefield? How do we square that with, thank you for your service and heroism, and that kind of that deeper, for me at least, that deeper level of, can that answering that question, can I be fully known? Can i can i live my truth and still be loved and honored and respected and valued? And what a privilege to be on that journey with clients, and to share my experience and strength and hope with others, to let folks know that, you know what, it's okay.
Mhm.
This isn't a 12 to 15 session path for everyone. This doesn't have to be, the same thing, but that there is a way to heal from this, that we absolutely can heal from this and grow from this, and that we can be fully known, and that the fear that comes with this journey, I think, is pretty normal, and it's okay.
When you shifted that curriculum, a couple of questions here. What shifted in you, number 1? And what was your experience teaching this to the people you were teaching it to?
That's a great question. It shifted into for me teaching kind of, okay, here's the brain science, and which is all very legitimate. I mean, but being able to shift that into my own words, to get my, I'm very research driven. So being able to share, like Zimbardo with, and that sort of research with these students,
Mhm.
um, very powerful. Being able to talk about, even topics like I used to teach a seminar. It was called "Psychopaths, Narcissists, and Assholes, and How They Affect Us," and which was really kind of a fun title, but all very based in research,
Mhm.
and being able to say, okay, because most of my folks were going back to an active duty military unit, and so a lot of them had the question, how do I, when I go back to my military unit after having been here for 28 days, do I, are we going to ignore the elephant in the room? Am I just going to pretend that I was off on, like at a spa vacation? Or am I going to control the narrative and take a part of this? How do I deal with people in my chain of command, or maybe an in law, or maybe someone, a boss, someone who's not particularly on my side?
Right.
How do I talk to them about what I was experiencing in my healing journey going forward? Because we need that social support. We need this, or we need support from the people who love and care about us. But unless we are independently wealthy, most of us, after having some sort of mental health crises, we have to go back to work. And we're faced with this impossible task of, how do we talk, like how do I talk to HR
Mhm.
about needing to take time off twice a week to go to therapy? How do I talk to my boss who thinks that maybe I'm faking it? Um, how do I talk to someone who maybe looks at me and says, "Well, she was never in the army. There's no way she speaks Arabic." How how do we talk to people who maybe don't support us about and get that support? And thankfully, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's so much great psychology and great data. Whether we're looking at, the aspects of narrative therapy, or we're looking at, the Rosenthal effect. We can just take all of these wonderful, seemingly disparate concepts, and I was able to pluck them out and put them
Mhm.
into a curriculum and say, okay, here's, very pragmatic, what is our course of action? How do we choose our course of action? Then what? And
Right,
then what do
right.
we do after? And here's the sites to support it.
What would you say from your perspective now to your younger self when you first started experiencing your symptoms?
I would encourage her to find support, to talk with others, to connect with others, even if it was just one. other person. I, in my own journey, I thought that I'd be alone and unafraid, 6 feet tall and bulletproof, which I'm neither. Um, but I wish that and I understand why I didn't. I understand why I didn't. And I certainly don't look back in blame or shame for this. But
Mhm.
one thing I wish that I had done with my younger self was um, reach out to others and find healthier coping skills. For me personally, I jumped into a bottle. I started drinking a lot. And just like any other coping mechanism, it works until it doesn't.
Mhm.
And when it didn't, it was a real problem. That's what I'd want my younger self to
Mm.
know.
Let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Virginia Cruse. Virginia, this is, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing this, your story. It's so intense and it's, I mean, the stigma, right? I mean, you mentioned that in your bio, how powerful that is. And would you, how would you describe the stigma around mental health currently within the military?
I was just thinking about this morning. So I appreciate you asking. It's I'm no longer working for the most part with active duty folks. And something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is, how do I was just talking to a client yesterday, for example, also an Arabic speaker and also kind of a similar background to mine, but certainly not same. And he is struggling. He's struggling, full stop. And his frustration in saying, I did, just a couple months ago, I was I was in this very intense mission, in which the weight of the world was on my shoulders. And now I'm having a meltdown in the Walmart parking lot because I can't find my car. And eh, and not feeling believed. I think that was the one thing that really he talked about that really it really resonated with me. As they said, I've got this experience, and I feel like when I share it to people, they're like, oh yeah, like that's nice, sure.
Mhm.
And what a different world to come from, this very almost like a horror movie set, and then to come to a very different world. And his struggle to find services while he is still very sick. I think that's really tough, for anyone who's a trauma survivor. Once we realize that, like, oh crap, I really need help,
Mhm.
we are still really not okay. And so the idea, or at least I wasn't, I'll just speak for myself, I wasn't okay. And so the idea of, okay, now I have to call my health insurance, and now I have to find a provider, and now I have to meet my deductible and interview a provider and ask all these questions. And I am not ready to talk about being trafficked, being raped, being abused, being beaten, being in an accident, all of my childhood sexual assault, my, being bullied. I'm not ready to talk about that, yet I know I need to. And to even get to that point, there are so many hurdles.
Right.
And there, military folks who get out often deal with the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is a bureaucracy in and of itself. Um, and as our health insurance, in the US. And so it's difficult to, even when we know we need help, like when I got voluntold to go to mental health, I knew I needed help. but then I did not, I mean, that was a licensed psychiatrist. It's a licensed mental health professional.
Right.
Um, the first part of the Soldier's Guide to PTSD is a chapter called What PTSD Isn't, yeah, and rumors.
Mm-hmm.
And the rumor mill about PTSD within military communities, from what I've experienced, is really powerful. And I wish that I could say that these were just rumors that I heard from other soldiers, other veterans, but these are rumors that I've heard from other clinicians, from other licensed mental health professionals, some of them who work as trauma therapists, supposedly. Um, things like you'll never recover, PTSD, there's no cure. Like,
Mm-hmm.
forget recovery, you're done. Um, or that PTSD is only for military, it's only for folks who were in combat and people feeling like they don't, quote unquote, deserve to have PTSD. And these are, golly, you know, and, I mean, and we know that now as clinicians.
Right.
But I'm trying, I go back and I look at my own experience about talking with that colonel. What a pivotal time that was for me. And that could have gone very poorly, very fast, to the point where we say, all we have to do is say 22 a day. And everyone knows what that means. That's how ubiquitous military suicide is. It's like MST. Like, it's so ubiquitous. It has its own freaking acronym.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, really?
Right.
That's not okay. Um, but at that time, I was really not okay. I was really not okay. And that could have gone very badly, very quickly. I'm so thankful that I have a loving family, incredible friends, wonderful support. I'm really, really lucky. And I recognize that there are a lot of folks who aren't that lucky. It, it's hard to get help.
Yeah.
And that's not okay.
The book is called The Soldier's Guide to PTSD. Where can people get that, Virginia?
Uh, Certainly, you can go to thesoldiersblog.com,
Okay.
and folks who sign up for our blog, we're giving away a free audio book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we are doing that as a giveaway for your listeners, because
Like
nobody becomes a
that.
trauma therapist for the money or the fame.
And that's a soldiersblog.com.
Thesoldiersblog.com.
Okay,
You can
awesome.
sign up for our newsletter, and we will email you the audiobook for download. That being said, one thing I would want your listeners to know is it is not for everyone. So it is not a clinician's guide to PTSD. It's a soldier's guide. So it's from one soldier to another. It's from me to my community. So if some of the language is harsh, we talk about things in a very blunt way that is analogous to the culture.
Sure.
But it can be a feeling herder if you're not ready for it. So that's one thing I would want your listeners to know.
Okay, I
But
appreciate
they
that.
could, yeah, they can buy the book on, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. You can buy it at thesoldiersblog.com.
Okay. And what's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
Sure, certainly through our social media. So we have a TikTok, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram. Then don't worry, I don't run any of them. I have a really young, incredible group. We are just true believers, and we are all in. And that is the best way to get a hold of me, or certainly through our blog, through
Okay.
thesoldiersblog.com. And
Awesome.
we respond to everybody.
Awesome. Well, look, Virginia, I want to thank you so much for coming on here and sharing you and your story. You are incredibly inspiring, and I can't wait to have you back here on this podcast. But again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for caring about what we do. It's an honor to
All
be
right.
here, really.
Take care.
You too.